Of the 7.5 billion people in the world, it's estimated that 70% are working, which means there must be around 5 billion jobs out there with millions of different sectors. Some people clock in regular 9 to 5 hours, and some people graft less conventional days' work, pulling longer hours in more extreme conditions. Some jobs can be deadly without the right training. In today's video, we're talking about the 15 riskiest jobs in the world. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to The Supreme, and click the notification bell for more lit content. Let's get rolling. Number 15. Powerline maintenance. We'll kick things off today by talking about one of the most dangerous jobs in the world that not many of us think about on a daily basis. Of course, that is powerline maintenance. According to some experts, this is one of the top 10 deadliest jobs on Earth, and it's not hard to see why. These brave men and women are elevated high into the air and then work hands-on with a lot of high voltage. And just think about how important these jobs actually are. If there's one thing most of us first worlders take for granted, it's electricity. Well, maybe that and the internet, but even without electricity, there is no internet. This job is so dangerous that for every 100,000 American powerline maintenance workers, anywhere from 30 to 50 are killed just doing their job every single year. So yeah, I'd say that this is a pretty risky job. Number 14, fisher. Working in the commercial fishing sector is an incredibly dangerous job for those who trawl out to sea. Fishing has the highest fatality rate in Canada and among the highest in the United States. The surprise budding anglers who go fishing for fun, but those who fish for a living are between 28 to 40 times more likely to die than other workers. The problem with commercial fishing is that the job takes place in unpredictable and often chaotic conditions in remote locations. If something goes wrong on a fishing boat, like for example, the vessel is stuck with bad weather, it's not as if help can quickly be at hand, especially if the boat is in the middle of the ocean. Similarly, if a fisherman goes overboard in bad weather, there is very little that can be done. One of the most dangerous places to be is a fisher in Alaska, where shifts can be 18 to 20 hours long and the temperature be unbearably cold. A lot of Alaskan fishers succumb to hypothermia. Part of the problem with the fishing industry, at least in the United States, is that workers are not always well trained in disaster aversion. There are no mandatory safety reviews for commercial fishing boats in the States, as well as being mentally prepared for unruly conditions. It's important that fishers and vessels have the right life-saving equipment on board, like life vests, ropes, whistles, lights, etc. Number 13. Pilot. Being a pilot is a dangerous job, but training and on-air traffic control make the daunting work a lot easier. Unlike some of the other dangerous jobs on our list, being a pilot is a pretty well-paid venture, but it does come with deep responsibility for the lives and safety of others. Pilots have to be vigilant at all times and regularly work super long hours. To become an airline pilot, a person needs to gain 1,500 hours of flight time and undergo rigorous training. Obvious risks to pilots include bad weather, other air traffic, takeoff and landing procedures, fuel emergencies, and the low but possible risk of terror incidents. Planes can come into trouble in storms if birds fly into their engines, sure, but they also have increased risks of developing deep vein thrombosis, severe dehydration, and skin cancer from the increased exposure to UV rays. Airline pilots are generally a lot less at risk than charter pilots who work to fly planes in trickier areas. For example, charter pilots in Alaska have the tough job of navigating bad weather and landing in remote areas. It's important to remember, though, that human error is the #1 cause of deaths for airplane pilots. I don't know if that's comforting or scary. Number 12. Roofer. The obvious danger when it comes to being a roofer is falling off of a roof, which can cause serious injuries or death. It's reported that being a roofer is the 4th most hazardous job in the United States, with 75% of roofing fatalities caused by falls. You may be shocked to know that the heights don't even need to be that great. 2/3 of all roofing deaths happen at under 30 feet. The risk of falling could be greatly depleted by the use of personal fall arrest systems, but most roofers aren't provided with this safety measure, which means if they fall, they fall. Another major hazard that roofers have to contend with is the risk of being electrocuted by coming into contact with overhead power lines, or even in extremely rare scenarios, lightning strikes. Also, dangerous as the hot tar often used in roofing and also the sharp equipment is, being a roofer is an average paying job, but the risks are quite a lot higher than standard employment opportunities. Statistically, a roofer is more likely to be injured or worse during the beginning of their career, which suggests better training could make the workplace much safer. Number 11. Refuse collector. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. Being a garbage collector is not only sometimes kinda stinky, it's also pretty risky. Did you know that sanitation workers experience twice the fatality rates of police officers? Each year, around 33 waste collectors are killed on the job, with thousands more injured. The problem with refuse collection is what people throw away. Often broken glass, nails, or sharp pieces of wood can harm collection workers who don't realize they're picking up something dangerous. On top of that, sometimes people dispose of unsafe chemicals, which can be corrosive and/or poisonous if they leak. Sometimes biohazards like dirty needles will crop up in trash. On top of the actual waste risk, refuse collectors work in all weather conditions, from freezing cold icy days to boiling hot conditions. Heavy vehicles and often heavy loads mean that accidents can and will happen. As well as the health risks, a lot of refuse collectors feel personally stigmatized for the line of work, which isn't generally very lucrative at all. Number 10. Truck drivers. Sometimes I think I'd love to take to the open road and just drive a truck for a living, but the health risks are actually shockingly high. One of the main problems with being a truck driver is that it involves hours and hours of sitting. Studies have proven that humans need to move, ideally every 30 minutes. Evidence appears to suggest that sitting down with little movement all day is likely to lead to an earlier grave. Stagnancy is a contributing factor to obesity, and let's face it, where do you think most truck drivers get their food from? Fast food drive-thrus and roadside grills are only going to add to the problem. Statistically, truck drivers are more likely to smoke too, which further strains their health. Stagnancy can also lead to hypertension, aka high blood pressure. Beyond that, truck drivers are more susceptible to developing diabetes, fatigue, depression, spinal injuries, and sleep apnea. There's also the increased risk of a road accident. On average, large trucks are involved in nearly 90,000 crashes a year in the United States, and there are additional hazards when loading, unloading, and docking. Around 918 truck drivers die each year in the United States, or 24.7 per 100,000 people. Like a lot of jobs on this list, truckers don't make a whole lot of bank. Number 9. Farmers. Farm work is no joke because of the heavy equipment and chemicals used as part of the job. 25.4 for every 100,000 farmers die each year in the United States, and the mortality rate among farmers is at its highest between April and September, during the peak of the growing and subsequent harvesting season. The main threat to farmers are tractor accidents or all-terrain vehicle accidents. These days, the practice of farming is a lot safer because of rollover technology and new tractors, but of course, accidents still happen. Because that machinery and equipment are risky, some farmers report near-death experiences with grain bins, old silos, unseen wells, agricultural chemicals that can lead to long-term lung damage, sun exposure leading to higher risks of skin cancer, and of course rare but sometimes deadly run-ins with livestock. Stress is a major risk to farmers too, with unpredictable weather patterns meaning crops may, fail, threatening livelihood. Number 8. Steel and iron workers. Working with metals is obviously dangerous. In 2005, the death per 100,000 rate for metal workers was 47, with the number only slightly improving in the past 15 years. There are 3 major dangers when working with iron and steel. In mills, workers are exposed to extreme temperatures that can seriously burn if something goes wrong. I don't want to be visceral, but furnace accidents do happen. Sometimes machinery explodes too. On construction sites, workers can also be seriously burned from welding. All of the burning going on also releases toxic chemicals that can cause long-term lung damage and chronic diseases, as well as short-term injuries if workers are exposed to deadly toxins. In both mills and construction sites, there is increased risk of injury or death from falling. Metal workers will install steel beams to create structural frames, which often involves climbing and balancing in high places. Equipment is also at risk of falling and injuring workers on the ground. Crane collapses, for example, pose a serious threat. Metal workers are more likely than workers in other area trades to be fatally injured from a fall. Less deadly but still concerning risks that come from metal work include possible repetitive muscle strains and injuries and gradual loss of hearing through excessive noise pollution. Metal workers have a lot of hoops to jump through to protect themselves, but of course, it's worth it to be safe at work. Number 7. Miners. Historically, mining has been one of the most dangerous professions of all time. Miners are 3 times more likely to die in the US than other workers, but the mortality rate was much higher than, say, 100 years ago, before the introduction of safety equipment and regulations. Mining pays slightly above average, but the rigors of the job are intense. Miners spend most of their days in dark, underground conditions, so claustrophobics are out of the running. Often tunnels are unstable and prone to collapse or flooding. Often, mining can release dangerous gases, which can poison workers too. Back in the day, miners would famously take a canary down a mine shaft, and if they stopped singing, they knew to get out of the tunnel immediately. Canaries and other small birds have tiny lung capacities, so they would be poisoned by gas much quicker than a human would be. Of course, these days, miners carry carbon monoxide detectors with them so they don't have to risk the lives of the birds. Heavy machinery can be risky in mining, and workers can suffer long-term issues with dust inhalation. Some of the world's worst mining incidents took place in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The 1906 Courrières mine disaster led to the death of 1,099 people in France. A Chinese disaster in 1942 took the lives of over 1,500 people as a result of a fire and the cruel decision to seal off the mine and let workers perish. One of the most recent and deadly mining disasters took place at the Soma mine in Turkey in 2014, when an explosion led to the deaths of 301 people. Number 6. Construction workers. Working construction is hard and dangerous. According to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, construction workers made up 21.4% of workplace fatalities in 2015. Working in construction is an average-paying occupation with some big risks. The fatal 4 in construction are, in order, falling, being stuck by an object, electrocution, and being caught between objects. Falls account for 80% of construction deaths, and this is because workers in construction have to contend with roofs, ladders, and scaffolding regularly. Power tools are dangerous too, as are machinery and equipment like forklifts and other trucks. On top of that, construction can involve fires and the burning of carcinogens. The risk of death is one thing, but it's way more likely that a construction worker would simply just be injured on the job. But some injuries can make working in the physically strenuous field impossible to do again. Number 5. Police. The words police officer are pretty contentious at the moment. A lot of people feel at risk as a result of run-ins with police, and I want to take a moment just to recognize that. The intended role of the police is to keep peaceful law and order. Whether or not that is currently working or not is a separate talking point, but the risks associated with that for the officer can be far-reaching. While a lot of police work is bureaucratic, officers have regular run-ins with drunks, violently ill people, and violent criminals. Police officers are called into risky situations. At the extreme end, a police officer may have to defuse a bank heist or a hostage situation or chase an armed homicidal suspect. But they also have to deal with lower octane but still dangerous situations like domestic abuse complaints. Also, police officers often need to drive at high speeds, which can lead to road accidents. While it is rare, officers can also be victims of targeted attacks, and the fear of that kind of incident can play heavy with their stress levels. Some police officers can become vulnerable to mental illnesses like PTSD. They can be exposed to some extreme situations, and without proper counseling, their mental health is always at risk. All things considered, while being a police officer is risky, statistically, the number of people killed or critically injured by police is higher than the number of officers killed or critically injured in the line of duty. In 2019, 1,098 people were killed by police compared with 48 officers feloniously killed and 41 accidentally killed. Number 4. Loggers. If you're unsure what a logger actually does other than, work with logs, the role is a physically demanding job where the worker will cut down or cut up trees. The dangers with this job are multi-pronged. Machinery, heights, and falling timber all pose significant threats. In the logging industry, there is a certain type of tree referred to as a widowmaker because of its common threat. Widowmakers are shikit trees, and they're a contributing factor in more than 20% of tree striking incidents with loggers. A shikit tree is a tree that has become dry or rotten on the inside, but may look fine on the outside. These trees are total hazards and all too regularly fall on unsuspecting workers. Being a logger is a high-risk job in all countries, inclusive of the United States, where, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, loggers have the highest number of deaths per 100,000 workers, with over 132 expected to die from that number and around 2,450 others injured. This figures making logging 39 times more dangerous than the average job in the United States, although it's below average on the pay scale. A logger can expect to bank $30,000 to $40,000 a year, leading a lot of people to ask whether or not it's worth the risk. Number 3. Taxi driver chauffeur. Driving people for a living can be a tough job, and depending on who you're driving and where, it isn't exactly a high-paid vocation. Drivers are at risk from threatening or poorly behaved customers, and if you consider the recent COVID saga, they're also exposing themselves to close quarters with people they don't know who could well be traveling sick. Financially, the risk of being a driver in a traditional taxi is that clients won't pay, although rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft have made the whole industry safer by removing the cash element, which also reduces potential robbery risks. The risk that comes from driving for a living is that roads can be dangerous places, and the more you drive, statistically, the more likely you are to experience a road accident. Taxi drivers are also at risk of exhaustion when pulling long hours and similar long-term illnesses as truck drivers, as they don't move around for a living. According to OSHA, taxi drivers have a homicide rate of over 20 times that of an average worker. Number 2. Cement mixing. As you have properly realized by now, any physical labor job that involves machinery comes at an increased risk of injury. With cement mixing, hazards can arise from improper use of machinery, and the machines here are heavy duty. It's rare, but construction workers do accidentally fall into the mixer, which is often fatal. While that is unlikely and extreme, other cement workers experience chemical reactions when they come into contact with wet cement, which can cause first, second, and third-degree burns. The real issue with cement workers is that extreme and unnoticed hazards of cement dust. Short-term exposure to cement dust can irritate the eyes and nose, but long-term exposure can cause silicosis and lung cancer. Proper safety equipment and clothing is important for minimizing the risks posed to cement workers. On top of the risk posed to industry professionals, concrete trucks pose a road safety hazard too, as do unattended cement mixers. Number 1. Landscaper. Landscaping can be a risky job with around 18 deaths per 100,000 workers. As I'm sure you can guess by now, a lot of risks come from working with equipment and machinery. Ladders, trimmers, mowers, they all pose risks. In April 2019, a landscaper was reported to have passed away in Kentucky when he lost control of his mower and drove into a pond. Mowers are involved in a lot of landscaping injuries. I don't want to get too ghoulish about it. I'm sure you can imagine. Landscapers work in all weather too, which can sometimes be dangerous. An overlooked risk to landscapers is tick bites. Obviously, landscaping professionals work outdoors, which means they're at risk of being bitten or attacked by wildlife. If a person is bitten by a tick, there's a chance they could develop Lyme disease. Of course, there are risks of road accidents from transporting equipment to, and the possibility of angering a customer who could turn nasty. That was 15 of the riskiest jobs in the world right there for you. Some jobs are more dangerous than others, but the biggest risk, in my opinion, is spending your life doing something you don't like. Health and safety can be taught, but job satisfaction is harder to grasp. Which of these jobs do you think is the most dangerous? Let me know down in the comment section. If you had to do one of these jobs, which one would you choose?